everyone. Welcome to Unbounded, the startup podcast. So let's just not beat around the bush here. We have the legendary NP with us. That's how you go by in my friend circles and all. I'm not sure if you actually realize it, but welcome to the show. Very happy to have you here, and it's a dream of mine to host you on my podcast here because me being a follower of the New Space India podcast itself, and I think it's really something which I can just tick out of my checklist itself. So let's just start with the question which has been in my mind for very long since I've looked at your profile itself. So associate with SETS, curator of the New Space India podcast, associate with such, and Dhruva Space, and lots of other things as well. First question: how? So how can you manage so much, and how can you have a multidisciplinary view of so many things that's been happening and try to stay on top of the game in everything? So how is that? How do you do that?
I don't know. You just need to follow your intuition and keep doing whatever you want at the end. I think at the end of the day, if you want to do something and you believe that there's certain directions that you need to take and certain opportunities come on to your way, then things just fall into place. Because for me, it's always been that new space is a movement that we need to begin in India and to move things further. So whatever opportunities came in that way, I always grabbed it with my hands and said no to nothing. Even if I didn't know something, I'll say yes and then said I'll figure out how to do it, right? So essentially, I guess it's just that. And also opportunities are far and few. You should know that, having doing all these things in India, opportunities are always far and few outside of the government setup, and always. So I think now that's where it all started, where we looked at firstly creating opportunities for ourselves. When you try to create opportunities for yourself, I think you make luck happen. So I guess that's the process, and some doors open, some doors close. So normally we in India are not so used to failure so much, but it's this is like a sales guy process of trying to knock on doors, and some doors are always shut and people will smack the door in your face.
Is that experimental, whatever you've been doing? Is that trial and error? You just go talk to people and they say no, and that's how you learn it. Does it work that way?
Yeah, even for every idea it's like that, because there are 100 ideas that, let's say you have, or I have. So there's 100 ideas and there's 100 people who are in charge of those 100 ideas. And you start populating those ideas in the marketplace of things, right? So, and there's some ideas that will take time and effort and patience, and it will take its own time for it to mature over time. But you're just plugging away at it. But then when the thought process is kicked off among people, and good things are kicking off, so some doors will be always closed for some certain time, right? But then when those ideas mature over time, things just start falling into place. And now I've seen that happen over and over for some time. So that whole process was based on intuition, that needing to just keep knocking at doors, to be the door-to-door sales guy. And then the marketplace of ideas, they are floated and people are kind of taking the call, and if they'll buy and bite the idea or not, right? So some people have written that idea and they've joined the things that they want to do and so on. So that's the result of it. But there's still ideas that are in the marketplace that are still not, people have not bought that idea.
So you seem to be like somebody who has the knack of just picking up opportunities just by looking at it, and you understand that there's a real opportunity there, and you just try to make use of it. So I am assuming that you've been doing this for very long, that you have such a huge network with you right now, that you have people associated with every part of the space domain itself who can help you out at various point in time and who can reach out to you for help. So when did this all begin? When did you realize that you needed to network, and how did this all start for you? So when was it that you started, and the journey itself?
Actually, when I just got back from Europe, where I studied, and got back to India, then I tried to meet some people in India, because locally, if you try to meet some people, you get to know something, right? So anybody would start with that. And the thing that I realized in India is that no one knew each other, but everybody were working around the same topics, right? And then I realized that there's somebody needs to like connect all these dots together, right? And the easiest way of doing it and the most inexpensive way of doing it was to just create a WhatsApp group and keep adding people to that WhatsApp group. That's about it, right? So my only goal at that point of time was that, okay, WhatsApp, the limit is like 258 people. Let me add one person every day as a goal. It's a very small goal, but every person added is added to the conversation, and no matter if they're checking messages or not, they'll randomly check messages or follow the community. And so that is the way you just start plugging into this, right?
So why did you think that you had to do this? Why do you think you had to create this network?
Somebody had to do it, so why not? I mean, if you have like the time and energy and patience to do that, so somebody had to do it.
So I think that really puts forth the emphasis of collaboration over competition, which most of the European countries focus on, and I think that's something which has been lacking here for so long.
When collaboration, cooperation, all these things come later. It's mostly first, conversation is first, because to collaborate or compete or whatever, you need to have a conversation first. Because if you not even have a conversation, how do you know if you can collaborate or you just need to compete, right? So the first step is conversation, and for the conversation to happen, you need to kind of introduce yourself and get acquainted to somebody and have enough trust built into the system, so you are talking to each other.
So I am a student here, and I just come up and meet you, and I just get to this conference with you, and you speak to everybody in the conference literally, and I just stand there and wonder, how is this guy doing it? So I am just telling this because you brought the idea of conversations itself and how important that is. So I am assuming that you did not know everybody there at all, but then you somehow made sure to pick up some sort of conversation with everybody who you just saw, and you just started to talk. So how did you pick that skill up? So it's not a very easy skill at all. People always have something at the back of their mind, so it's not easy for everybody. So I think that's very important that you learn how to do it. So in case you have something to say on that as well.
So normally, what happens in most conversations are people are trying to sell their ideas to you, or sell something to you in or some sense, or they're trying to express their opinions to you, right? So in my case, I first try to listen to them first. So because ultimately, if you listen to some ideas from the marketplace of ideas of other people, and then you see kind of synergies with your own ideas, then it's easier to match. Because if you propose something normally, it's difficult to convince somebody there, because you come across as selling that idea, or pushing something too much. And especially if it is younger people, it's easier, because they look up to whatever, or a little bit older people. Generally that's the case. But if it's somebody very higher up, somebody higher up in ISRO or someplace else, they're not very friendly about all these conversations, especially if you're a younger person asking something or telling something to them and requesting things, because they get this all the time. But then if it's the other way around, you're just listening to them and navigating the conversation towards learning about what are they thinking about. And so that also gives you a very good analysis of really looking at what is going on in their mind, and where do they think the future lies. So you're connecting kind of the dots of the ideas in the marketplace, and that's telling you the combined picture of all those conversations is telling you something about the future.
So I think the takeaway here is that most of the time the problem with us is that we listen to not understand, but to just to reply. So that shouldn't be the case. Okay, so moving on that same terms as itself, the kind of environment you grew up in and the kind of skills you possess, and you are a startup guy, an entrepreneur itself. So how did this how did this scenario match with what you planned on doing? Say for example, you wanted to be an entrepreneur and you have a space company itself, and so the entire thought of becoming an entrepreneur and doing something like that was a result of the accumulation of all those skills and putting that into practice, or you decided that you wanted to become an entrepreneur and you had to do all these in order to take your venture forward. So how did that work?
Actually, almost nothing in my life was planned just by me, almost, because I would say I was like almost directionless, almost my entire like student life in that sense. But the good advantage that I had is that I had very good friends. So people who had ideas and people who had dreams, and somehow I was associated with them because I was good at like generally researching stuff, things, writing stuff, researching about things, and execution. Like for me, operations and executions come kind of very naturally, of kind of working together in a team and making sure things are happening. But I think over time I've learned that I'm pretty bad at like dreaming about a certain future in that sense, but I'm pretty good at executing the present and the immediate future, right? So it for me it's always happened that either co-founders or teammates or something, I was lucky in terms of having people around me who were good at those things, where you need to envision the future and sell your ideas to somebody and so on. So that's been a kind of a lucky element with me there. But otherwise, I guess it's just it happens.
Amazing. So moving on the same terms itself. Let's hear from you firsthand about how the entire journey of Sat Search began, and why did you choose to have it, and the story itself.
So actually, SatSearch actually began even before I was at SatSearch, because it was actually in a hackathon that SatSearch began in Europe, in Bremen, in a city in Germany. They conducted a space hackathon over a weekend, and in 48 hours, actually, many companies were born, and SatSearch was one of them as an idea, not as a company, because they were just a hackathon in a weekend, and people rated those ideas, and SatSearch won one of the awards in the hackathon. And essentially, Karthik and Alberto, the two guys who are my colleagues who originally started the company, they tried to run it for a year, and then they found that they were missing somebody who also had, more experience internationally in working in different regions, and could know the space industry a little bit more in terms of the people themselves and so on. So then, we were thinking about the same time of joining forces. So that's when I thought, okay, it's a good time, because I had also commenced my PhD in a way that I could take risk. So I did not need a salary in that sense, and I had no investors behind me or anybody, and don't come from a very wealthy family, so that somebody could finance me for 3 or 4 years in Europe. So the good way of taking a side bet, was to like say, okay, I'm going to finish my PhD, and at the same time I'll get 3 years of runway to build the company. So I split my time between working on my research and finishing the PhD, and at the same time building up the company. And 3 years, we're almost there. We have now a good set of customers. I'm also about to graduate with my PhD. So 3 years of plugging into the idea, 3.5, 4 years now, is it shows you some results.
I think, the recent graph which you put out on LinkedIn saying how SatSearch is being used by universities across and the global people itself, I think that just goes to show what kind of a platform you managed to create. So you've had this idea of the SatSearch itself, which has turned out to be an amazing startup plan. So what was the biggest challenge as a student for you while you were studying and working for your PhD and also running the company? I mean, you wouldn't know the ABC of the company by then as to how to run it unless you have had experience before. I am assuming that's your first time doing it. So what was the most challenging thing when you were doing that simultaneously?
I mean, challenges are every day and every instant in that sense, because normally in no place you are taught, in no university in that sense, as to how do you build a product into a market that is so new, and how do you face customers, or how do you bring users, and so all these are like everyday challenges for us, right? So we've kind of done every mistake in the book that needs to be done, and we've survived those mistakes. So I mean, in space, more than anywhere else, any other industry, it takes quite a long time for your brand to be recognized. It's not like today you're creating this, and tomorrow add some marketing fuel money into it, and everybody knows you. It doesn't work really that way. Normally, in the space industry, it takes anywhere between 7 and 10 years for your brand to be really recognized as something relevant to the industry, not even as a market leader, just relevant to the industry, right? So that in that sense, you need to really commit to that time and commit to learning every day, and making sure that you're reviewing what you're learning and executing more and more, and like doing more mistakes and learning what works and what doesn't work, right? So we were in that process, for 3.5-4 years. And so, but then the good thing was we were always learning, and the metrics always went up. So the confidence in what we are trying to do was showing, in the sense that, okay, the user base is growing, suppliers are now like showing interest in what we are trying to do and everything. So we've not made it completely yet, but we've also not like screwed everything up, because the evidence comes when people start paying you for whatever you've built. That's the evidence, right? So because the most difficult thing in the space industry is get to people to pay you for what you are building, because that's the most difficult thing to prove, and that too in the space industry.
So SatSearch obviously has customers in the Europe domain itself. So how easy or how difficult it is to get a startup running there when compared to India? And on if you can just do a small comparison. And
it doesn't really depend on the geography, I would say, for the startup itself, but I think it really depends on what kind of product or service that you're building. Because for us, maybe India would not have been the ideal geography, because most of the Indian companies that work in the space sector, their only customer is ISRO normally. So, and most of the IP is tied to ISRO satellites and ISRO supply chain and everything else. Most of them don't have any original IP of their own, which they sell globally. So given all those restrictions, we have to look at other geographies, because only in places like Japan or Europe or US, you have majority of the number of companies who have this original IP and original products that they are selling all over the world, right? So it makes sense to be closer to customers, because so that you can knock on their doors more often than staying thousands of miles away, right? So that's one of the reasons that we were in Europe, because it's all close knit for us.
And in terms of the workforce there and here, and the kind of people there and here, so did you find some sort of difference between that when you were?
So the thing is, the more west you move from a place like India to the US, the more like kind of west you move, the kind of more open-minded people become about ideas, especially people who want to try new ideas or give an idea a shot, right? So in India, I think people are a little more skeptical about an idea and executing it, or even trying it out, even as users or customers. In Europe, it's slightly better. In US, it's much better in that sense from Europe. So Europe is not an ideal place still, not as good as the US in terms of people who want to give something a shot, because in US normally people give everything a shot once at least to know if it works for them or not. So they kind of are open about trying something, right? In Europe, it's still conservative a little bit, but not as conservative as in India.
So that's there. And when I look at the kind of people you are and the caliber that you possess itself, I mean, you are there doing your PhD at Europe, and you just start this company. I am assuming that you did not have any sort of network or anything by then. So you just begin networking people. Let's say how long has it been? 2-3 years down the line?
Oh, it's been almost now 3.5 years.
Okay, so 3.5 years. 3.5 years, and it seems as if you have an influence over the government of India here. So you've become a person who's capable of doing that. You have become a partner with the Kerala Space Park here, and you also happen to collaborate with the event which is happening now. And how did you how did you manage to get along with the government, and they are looking up to you for ideas now, and they are looking up to conducting events. So how did that happen? Because you were somewhere else in Europe. So how did you manage to build such a network and have such an influence over here that you're actually doing something with the government now?
I mean, the whole process is longer because I started knowing about the whole ISRO ecosystem starting from 2008 already. So it's been not 10, 12 years now since I really got into the space sector and learned about it. Of course, I did my masters in US as well, in Europe as well. So spent some time there before as well. So that's the thing about the marketplace of ideas and people, because a lot of the people who are attached to this Kerala Space Park, like Sam, for example, we got connected all through the New Space India community network. And once we meet, we go out, we get a drink sometime, and talk about things. And there's some ideas that we float, and he's also excited about something, and then said, okay, I know the Secretary of Government of Kerala, and maybe we can pitch an idea about space for him. And then he pitched the idea, and we convinced him to come to Europe, where I hosted an event in the Toulouse Space Show 2 years ago. He turned up. I said, I'll get you all the meetings with all the people here just to show you what is the potential. And we set up a number of meetings for him to come and see people in Europe. And he visited all of them, and he saw what is the amount of interest. And then he was convinced that we should do something in space. So that's the thing. Through the network, people are collaborating and trying to find new synergies and involving other people, because if me and Sam, for example, wouldn't have met and have worked on these things, then whatever has happened with the space car would have never happened. But that started because a conversation between me and Sam, or me knowing him, happened 4 or 5 years ago, and through that everything is evolved.
That just goes to how powerful conversations are and how important networking is, rather than any other skill which anybody could develop. Speaking on the terms of skills, what skills would an ideal Sat Search employee possess, or what would you look for in somebody who's applying to work?
So actually, we are a very traditional non-space employee company, I think, because the only people, Sat Search is quite small. We're only 4 people in that sense. So, but then like half of our team, 2 of them are completely non-space people. So me and Karthik have a background in space, but the CTO of Sat Search is a PhD in bioinformatics. So it's nothing to do with the space industry. And that's the fun of being in the space industry, because you can still be in the space industry having a non-space background. And the head of marketing for our company is basically he's done digital marketing related work for 10 years for academia and a number of other sectors. So he comes again from a non-space sector, but comes with the core expertise of marketing, digital marketing. So I guess for a company like us, where we're not really building hardware, mostly building software and software tools and marketplace related tools, then we look more at the whole ideas around UX design and user experience, and then front end, back end, those kinds of things which are traditional. But otherwise, in terms of operations and sales, me and Karthik kind of run it between us, because we know the industry inside out. So between us, we can manage to run the day-to-day operations. But when it comes to features and so on, so it all depends on. So since I'm talking to a lot of users and a lot of suppliers, I get to hear about the kind of features that they would want to have. So I create that as a roadmap for the company to build, right? And then my other colleagues are just building it. They don't talk outside of the company. So they just listen to us from the feedback that we are getting to them, which is distilled from all the conversations that we've had with other people. So they just go ahead and kind of build that, and we see how that is playing out in terms of measuring the users, and their use on the website and things.
So I think it's very important that people like us get to know that we need not really possess the actual domain knowledge itself in order to take a venture forward, which is primarily into that domain itself. Because I've been thinking long back that okay, I need to have certain sort of core skills within the domain itself. I need to be a specialist in something, especially when the domain that is space, which is very intrinsic in itself. So I was thinking, okay, maybe I should go for masters, go for my PhD, get my solid skills thorough technically, and then maybe have a venture itself. So I think this kind of really puts into a very new perspective as to how we should probably think and look into approach. So, and when I look at your profile, I look at your degree, and you have so many degrees. So you've studied astrophysics, space law is one, and you're doing a PhD in aerospace. And again, how and why so much?
Yeah, basically it's just curiosity, right? Because like I had a chance to do a kind of a dual master degree, which was through the European Union program. So and I spent like 6 months in Germany, 6 months in France, 6 months in Sweden. Got to spend time at the German Space Agency, and after I came back to India, tried to build a startup here for the next 2-3 years. I found a lot of problems in the policy realm, and I thought, okay, why not pick up some knowledge there? And while I was building the startup, I tried to get some do a professional kind of course for learning more about like space law and policy, and did that. And of course, like to get into the whole sat search realm, and for me to hack my way back to Europe, the easiest was to just get a student visa and to go back and so on. So otherwise you need to have a lot of money that you need to show as investment to get a startup visa and things like that, so which I did not have. So you need to kind of hack around things whatever is possible, which are in your possibility. So and achieve that, right? So maybe that's not the best path, but once something's worked out, you think that okay, it's fine. So long as it works out, any path is the best.
So everything is just trial and error, and you just basically you fiddled around with so much that you have so much wisdom to offer. So let me just ask you this: what would you say to people like me who are into entrepreneurship? So when let's just take for my example itself here, that say I wanted to start a startup down the line. Maybe I just want to create a brand with Unbounded itself and form it as a company and take it from that point forward. Probably like bring in something like masterclass towards space. So with ideas like that and the stage where I'm at and all that, so what kind of tips would you ideally give to someone who's looking into space entrepreneurship, especially here?
So generally, I think I get a lot of requests from India almost on a daily basis from people either thinking about entrepreneurship or thinking about career in space or things like that, right? So I think you kind of need to separate the dream from reality in that sense, because I think in India generally I find more than in any geography, I think in India, especially Indian students, I find that they have a fascination to space, which is more like an awe of the space activities and astronauts and satellites and space and other things. But that's just a kind of a dream, but it's to make that into a reality, the commitment is kind of not there, right? So they expect others to give them that platform and give them all the resources, and they're just there with those ideas there. So I think that's the main thing, that you need to kind of the question is always how long are you committed to executing this idea. So most people say quit in a year maximum, or 2 years or 3 years, so it really depends, because I strongly believe that most of the companies, most of the people, it's like startups always commit suicide, they don't die, right? So that's what normally people say. They always say normally it's always that startups commit suicide and they don't die, right? So the question is like always that. So because I think like even for us, we've failed over and over for many years, like from like launching the website to really getting our first customer took us almost 2.5-3 years. So, and we were trying to figure out in that whole process, how do you how a bunch of engineers will not just be engineers, will also be sales people, will also be marketing people, will also be like XYZ people. And we made all mistakes in that. But the good thing is that we always had a team that I always considered to be like one of the very best, because we are very good dynamic between the people ourselves, and the commitment in the team, and also the honesty between like the founders, and everything is very, very good. So in that sense, it's that I think is very, very, very critical.
So it's interesting that you're actually bringing this topic of resilience that people must possess in order to become successful. I think I'm seeing that example in almost all the people who have been on the podcast here itself. Gadadhar said that he had to wait for 11 years until he registered the company, and same was the case with Nikita. She had to spend 2 years doing nothing at all after registering the company, and you say that you have to wait 3 years. So is it the question of just sticking to the ideas rather than looking for an immediate evaluation of the idea which you had itself? So how was success? I mean, do I have to take it in a way that, okay, success comes only with patience? So, but I think it's a very a difficult journey to hold on as well, because there are two possibilities there. Either you're wrong and you just have to wait, or you're really wrong. I mean, there's no point in waiting at all. So when the mind, how do you actually find out that, okay, my idea is worth it and I have to wait until this becomes a success? Or how do I know that my idea is right or my idea is wrong?
No, it really depends on your customers or users or so on. So for us, the metric is that, as a business that is a marketplace, there is always at least one thing that you can measure for any business, in any, even the most bizarre businesses out there, right? There's at least one thing that you can measure where you can say, if this metric is kind of going up, then my ideas are like kind of good and people are interested in this, right? So in traditional businesses, it's more easy to measure. So, like if you're running on Ola or Uber or something, the metric is very clearly two things, right? If I can get more cars and if I can get more people riding or driving, right? But in the space business, it's like the same thing. So you need to kind of say, okay, in building whatever my product, when I'm pitching this or when I'm like getting this into the market, is the demand like kind of there? And so there will be, of course, mixed noises and everything, but then the real like signal out of all the noise would be to not look at other people's opinions, but adopters, the early adopters' opinions, and look at what are they saying. And if you get a sense that your ideas are kind of still very bare and you have to shape them in a way that adopters need them in a certain way, so that's all like the conversation. So that's the conversation between you and...
That's an iterative process. And moving on that similar terms itself, you've created SatSearch and you've put out the website, and you said it took 3 years for you to get the first customer in. So what was your immediate step after you realized that, okay, it is going to take time? So what can I do after that realization point in order to get the customer as quick as possible? So what was your first step?
So it's very simple, right? So in our case, it's about value generation. People pay you for value. And for us, the 3 years happened because we were trying to figure out how are we generating value and how are we quantifying that value to somebody to pay us, right? So, so in that sense, we started generating value because we had more and more users come to the website and more activity going on, and through that, we were starting to generate value for suppliers. So, and the early customers that we had were people who kind of believed in the vision that we had, but they just didn't, simply believe in what we said as a vision, but they had some evidence that whatever we are trying to do, it's kind of showing some signs of working. So they trusted us by giving us, an initial contract saying, okay, we are well-wishers of this idea because we like the idea, we will risk it because we are taking an initial dive, so it may not cost us as much as if this company was really established very well. So they kind of dived into this, and that allowed us to get a deeper opinion, because now you have a customer who you can talk to because he's paying you, and so whatever is his pain points, then you can talk to him and sort it out, and so on.
So when you talk about convincing customers and getting them to use your service itself, so I think there is one really underrated skill which just underlies that fact that you need to be able to persuade people, irrespective of the kind of ideas which you have, because an idea which could be a total flop could also be taken into the next step if you have the right ability to convince, or if you just put it in the right way itself. So how important do you think that aspect is, the ability to convince people to believe in what you do?
Again, it's an iterative process, and people have said this is ridiculous to us. Like they've said nobody in space does business like this. We are like uh, like it's like real estate business, right? So who imagined that people would buy real estate on a website maybe 20 years ago, right? So it's like that. We would always say, this is like a face-to-face business where you need to meet the client, you need to show them around, you need to have. So that was like the traditional mindset. So and there will always be people who even criticize us today on a daily basis, saying this is shit, we don't think this will work, and so it's not really so we all try to avoid those people. We believe that they will get convinced someday or the other. We don't give up on them, but we try to then look at working with people who are more convinced than them. So it's finding those. And the good thing is, once the first person is convinced, it's always easier to convince the second person. So the most difficult bit is to convince the first. Yeah, right. Then the second one happens, and then the third one happens, and after that, after a while, people refer you to other people, or they just they are curious because as to why the other people are paying for this, and so we see a lot of that happen with us.
All right. So you must have visited tons and tons of venture capitalists, people who can invest, angels for that matter. So what kind of homework do you do before you pitch your idea to people like them who are ready to invest? So what is that one factor which you put into your speech or put into your pitch itself that is going to make your pitch stand out from the rest of the crowd?
So actually, we did meet a lot of investors, but the thing is that we believe that after pitching for like a year or something, we came to a conclusion. We had an offer to invest, getting invested as well, and we came to a conclusion that we should not get any venture capital at all into the company, because we spent 3.5-4 years building the company up with our own money and with our own efforts, and we are at a stage where we can afford not to have any venture capital and still grow the company organically, right? So why give out equity to people who will not contribute anything other than money, generally, in that sense? And also it makes decision making easier, because we are only the founders on the table who will take the decision in anything. So we actually don't need venture capital at the stage that we are. It's only a matter of like us stabilizing our own business, and we could be profitable and still run a profitable business without having to bother about venture capital at all. So the best businesses, I always believe, is businesses who can survive and thrive even without venture capital. And venture capital is normally like fuel, basically, and they will only come and throw that fuel on a fire that is already burning. And like our fire is like, yeah, it's burning, but we don't need that kind of fuel to have such a big fire.
Right. That's great. So we'll end the chat with this one question. So how do you think India's space startup system trajectory is set as of now? So what kind of opportunities can young entrepreneurs expect to get from the government or from the fellow companies itself? So how is that playing out right now?
4 or 5 years ago, they were maybe like less than 3 or 4 startups. And today, for example, they said there are more than 40 of them today. So within a span of 5 years, you've had 40 companies come up. I'm sure there'll be many more that will come up in the future. So I would expect this to like double in the next 5 years. So maybe 80 plus or 100 startups in the whole scene. And so I guess it really depends, because of course not every company will be successful and not every business will be successful. But it's always good to see that the trend is generally positive, in a sense that the net of all of it is always moving forward rather than shrinking, right? So I would say in the next 5 years, I would expect 100 plus startups in India generally. And I'm hoping that there'll be more investment into a few of them. At least 10% of them or 15% of them will have good investments in place, and maybe a few of them would have launched, and I would be hiring more people and would be operational in that sense. So that's generally the hope.
So I think it's all set to grow. That's the idea which we are getting at. So thank you so much, Narayan. It has been fun. So we'll hope to do something again soon with you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for the collaboration, and you've been helping me with recording the podcast, and I thank you a lot for that.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure to do it for you. Thank you. Cool.